Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Friday. Brian Kamenetsky and Andy Kamenetsky. Andy, we're getting into June, which means the trade rumors are going to start heating up. And man alive, do you have a doozy of a hypothetical to run by the audience
I love
today?
These. You know I love these.
That's next on Locked On Lakers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, sometimes on weekends, whenever news happens, no matter how you get your podcasts, where you get your podcasts, always free, never behind a paywall, fresh Lakers content for you. Locked On Lakers on YouTube, of course, is where you go to find and look at the podcast and see us, which is a bonus, I think. Lots to get into on Friday's show, Andy, and LeBron James has declared that he would like to own an NBA team, and he would like to be in Las Vegas, which will make it very easy for him to fill his NBA team. So there's that, which we'll try to get to. You have I think, fascinating trade hypothetical to run by people.
You know, Brian, that I love me both a fake trade and a thought experiment. And this was really exciting, actually. When we were at Darvin Ham's press conference afterwards, the Lakers were kind enough to serve us all lunch. And we were talking with another local member of the media. I'm not going to say who, but we were talking about the whole Russ thing. And he had mentioned...
What Russ thing?
Yeah, that they might consider trading.
Like, is there a thing going on with Russ? Did I miss that?
That the Lakers would be at least theoretically open towards trading Russell Westbrook, and
we should talk about that on the show.
This media member, just tossing around suggestions, mentioned the idea of Russell Westbrook to Miami for Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson. This was unsolicited, Brian. This was my fake trade from a few weeks ago. I want this now to happen just so I can have spoken it into existence. Like
to be fair, I'm not a huge fan of that trade.
I'm not a huge fan of it.
Absolutely toasted in the playoffs this year. And Duncan Robinson, if he doesn't rebound to that mid 40% three-point shooter that he was for first couple seasons in the league, is borderline useless.
Yeah, unplayable.
So I don't love that one. This one, though, that you've got for people later in the show, dare I say, will tear at them even more.
Well, I just like the idea, Brian. I would speak that one into existence, A, because in my hypothetical, the Lakers give up no assets to move Russ, which is very important to me. And B, it means I got to play God. And that's what really, these little fleeting opportunities I ever get, Brian, to be the most powerful person in this universe. It's very exciting.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll get to that. And it is related in part to this. People may remember on Thursday's show, we noted that the Lakers have started working out some street free agents, the guys who are not currently on teams or under contract anywhere. Your Langston Galloways and Kyle Guys and DJ Wilsons and
Alizé Johnson, guys like
that. People of that ilk. And obviously, those aren't the players necessarily the Lakers are looking for to try to really.
You're saying their 1201 call is not going to be Alizé Johnson?
I mean, maybe it is. But it's like, hey, Aliza, can you hold, please? Yes, I can. These are guys you're looking at for one of the 7 or 8 roster spots that you're going to have available to fill with minimum players. Potentially minimum players. So today, though, Thursday, as we get into Friday, Jovan Buha at The Athletic kind of broke down some of the types of players that the Lakers would be looking for based on what Darvin Ham said in his press conference on Monday. And it's stuff, Andy, that we've talked about, 3-and-D wings and a stretch 5 and a more mobile and athletic big that can cover a little more ground than what they had this year. Stuff like
Dwight
that.
or DeAndre, but playable.
Yes, exactly. We can
More
get
of a
into a
rim
few of the
runner than a
names
rim
here.
walker.
Hold on. I'll get out to the perimeter here in a moment to contest that three-pointer. Here. I don't know if that was Dwight or DeAndre. I'm not sure.
Doesn't really matter. Functionally, it was the same thing.
I'm going to drop my coverage right here like my pants. I don't know. Man, you had that queued up really quick. Was
Yes,
that
I
there?
did.
Was that always been there?
I loaded it today for something different. It came in very handy. There's got to be a better way to say that.
Yep. So we can get into some of the names that Jovan's talking about. It's certainly hard to argue with the priorities that he's got there. That would be based on any coach that they would have gotten. Certainly Darvin.
These are the things we've been saying all of last season and this offseason.
And rightly, Jovan says, I think, the first thing that they need to find are wings. Like this team desperately needs wings. Like so badly.
Dude, they didn't have really wings even the year they won the championship, like beyond a certain size. Like they had a lot of undersized, you can play them if you need to, 3/4 type guys, but they were pushing the limits with like Danny Green, Kyle Kuzma. And, Kuzma was still developing into that role at the time, but, Green could get bullied. KCP could certainly get bullied. Caruso was undersized for that, even though they've had a lot of
2-3s. Kuz is really the only 3-4 that they've played.
Right. And those guys, to be fair, did their job defensively well, but it's a different type of player.
And then this year they seem to sort of aggressively avoid having anybody who could do that other than Trevor Ariza. That didn't work. So here's some of the names that Jovan lists as free agents this offseason that could potentially. So Otto Porter Jr., Bruce Brown, Nick Batum, TJ Warren, Wesley Matthews, Caleb Martin, Cody Martin, all the Martins, Danwell House, Taurean Prince, Gary Harris, Joe Ingles, and Amir Coffey. Different players at different levels of the sort of the NBA ladder. People will get more or less excited about a lot of them. Somebody like Gary Harris 3 years ago would have seemed like a great acquisition and seems to have fallen off a cliff. Otto Porter, is a guy that we talked about for last season that ended up in Golden State, has played very well there. Bruce. What sticks out to me, and this is a theme that throughout the story, is just how difficult it's going to be to get the established guys on this list. Otto Porter, Nick, whether it's Nick Batum, TJ Warren, if he's healthy, whatever it might be, whether it's the 3-and-D wing or a stretch 5 or whatever it is, they're going to maybe be able to afford one player that you look at and say, that guy definitely 100% is a rotation player that they'll be able to use and that will also, improve the team and they can afford. It's just, they're really limited.
It's going to be difficult. I mean, it's one of the biggest reasons you could make the argument for stretching Russell Westbrook. And we've gone down this road before. We'll go down it again. We don't need to get into the pros and cons of all of it, but just that you would actually be able to get yourself to a non-taxpayer mid-level and you'd have $10 million, which theoretically you could use to re-sign Malik Monk, or you would have just more money that you could actually split up in that exception versus where they are now, which is, I think, 6.3. And
like that.
I think there are players on this list that you could get for about $6.5 million. Like I think Otto Porter Jr. could be gettable at around 6. But then the problem is you've used it all on one guy, putting aside the fact that you're really worried that last season was Otto Porter Jr.'s one healthy season.
Right.
In
and
what's otherwise
setting
been the
aside
norm.
On why would Otto Porter leave Golden State to come here? But
Bigger role.
Even setting that aside.
Bigger role, more to do, more opportunity, definite starter job. I mean, I could see the logic. Absolutely. Especially if Golden State happens to win this season, he gets his ring, he could be looking for more of an opportunity. I don't think it's inconceivable.
There's a really great there's a great name that he has on the stretch 5 list that is an argument that I think you would make, because I want to ask you both about Malik Monk and how he fits into this, and the type of player that you could get for 10 versus 6. So let's do that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline, your number one source, betonline.net, for all your betting stats and sports info. Get all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, baseball, boxing, MMA, NFL futures, all of it. Right now, as of this recording, heading into the NBA Finals Game 4, the Celtics are a 4-point fave. I don't know exactly how to bet this because, Brian, I think Boston is the better team, and I thought that heading into it. But they are also a really Jekyll and Hyde team, and it's hard to figure out exactly how they're going to play game to game. Steph can always go off. Clay had a great game 3, which could mean something or it could mean nothing. Wiggins has been sneaky good, but they're not as deep. Boston matches up well. It's complicated, but again, -4 for Boston as we speak right now. BetOnline, your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. So head to the website today, use your mobile device, learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the games start.
2 questions here that I think of it. So because you mentioned that the value of stretching Russ is that you get the biggest one is that you get a larger exception to deal with. You do get a small, another little exception too. That you could do for about $3 million, which actually would help the Lakers, because there's a big difference. A lot of guys are minimums and a lot of guys are really in that $3.5 million range. But if you could choose between somebody like Otto Porter or Malik Monk with that money, who do you pick?
How much of it am I using?
Just so you can have one or the other. And, maybe you have a little bit of change left over for Otto Porter, but not much. You're practically choosing between the two.
I would,
or a different wing that might be available. If you prefer on that list, if you prefer Bruce Brown, who is actually a really effective player.
I would say if I'm feeling optimistic, feeling lucky, you get some intel from people who know Otto Porter's health that no, they figured something out. He's figured something out. He looks as good as he's ever have moving forward. I would prefer Porter over Malik Monk because I think he fits more needs. You could make, I guess, the same argument with Bruce Brown. Like Malik Monk is a really good scorer, but I think in certain respects, he's best used as a guy off the bench to really cook, change the pace of a game, the composition of it, all of that. And, he's made some strides as a playmaker, but he can still he's better at it than I thought he would be. To be totally honest, he's way better than I thought. But he can get a little wild. And then in the meantime, as much as he tries defensively, and I think he really did try this season, there are limits with his size and his frame where I think he's always going to be a liability. I'm not even sure he could regularly be a defensive neutral unless you put a really good group around him. He can't rebound. I think there are more limits with Monk, even if, say, you think Monk is better as a scorer than Porter or Bruce Brown are at any one skill. I think wings fit the Lakers' needs more than Monk.
You're getting at a point that I think is critical, I think, for this offseason, because people love the story of Malik Monk. I am super glad that he came here.
Seems like a terrific guy.
Phenomenal. I mean, it's very difficult not to like. Came here in a situation where his career was clearly much more on kind of early life support than we all thought going into the season. And he's going to get paid. The guy turned himself into a really good NBA player, showed he has value, and he's going to get paid somewhere. Re-signing Monk doesn't make the Lakers better. It allows them to maintain whatever they were last year. They don't get better by bringing back one of their better players from last year. They stay the same. Signing a wing and letting Monk go could make them better. Because like you say, the positional need is just way stronger with that. So Another great example of like the difference I mentioned going into the break of like what you could get for 10 versus 6 if you wanted. I don't think this is a realistic option because I think he's not leaving Milwaukee, but Bobby Portis
Yeah.
has turned into and another guy on Jovan's list, has turned into a fantastic stretch 5, bench big. On the Lakers, he'd probably start next to AD as like a legit stretch 5.
Oh, yeah.
Great rebounder. Just turned into a really good player. And will not be available.
Fans would love him.
Oh, yeah.
He'd become the mayor of LA.
Yeah.
Apropos.
To use you want to talk about an opportunity to maybe do a little bit more than he could in Milwaukee in terms of status.
Mm-hmm.
He could probably have a bigger role here. Maybe. Milwaukee will probably pay him more. But like that kind of player would be worth making the Russ sacrifice for, because Portis would make them significantly better. Let's say you could get him for 10 million. I don't know if you could. Like you can make an argument that is the sort of player that you jump into. I wouldn't though do that just to keep Monk. That to me seems really short-sighted. Like you've got to have somebody that's going to make you better.
Speaking, Brian, of the Russ sacrifice, can I toss out the hypothetical?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, let's do this.
Okay. So I love this stuff. And, just thinking about different destinations for Russell Westbrook or possibilities. And last week, the Jazz and Quinn Snyder ended up parting ways. There were reports from ESPN, I believe Woj, that Donovan Mitchell was surprised and found this very troubling. I don't know why he was surprised. This has been talked about for months, but anyway,
all Quinn was doing was just making sure that Lakers job was filled before he left.
Right.
So he wouldn't have any threat of having to come here.
So now there's talk about what Utah is going to do moving forward. Their number one goal is, by all accounts, to keep Donovan Mitchell happy, keep Donovan Mitchell in Utah, even though a lot of people consider that a very uphill battle. He and the player I'm about to name, you've probably figured out it's Rudy Gobert. They do not have a great relationship. Rudy Gobert is also owed through 2026 $169 million. He is, however, a perennial defensive player of the year candidate. For all of his polarization, he is actually a very good defensive player. And if you really paid attention to the playoffs last year, you really were watching. Yes, you can throw out some matchups that give Rudy a little bit of trouble, whatever. On that team, he was not the problem defensively.
There is some truth, the idea that you can kind of play Rudy off the floor
or into
really defensively, but it's overstated. The bigger issue with Gobert is in the playoffs, he makes it much harder to play offense, not that it makes it much harder to play defense.
So,
yes.
Prefacing this, Brian, with the idea that I don't think this would actually work for Utah. I think they could do better than this.
Yeah, there are already rumors, Rudy for Vooch, Rudy for, they'll get something better than Russ.
But would you be willing to go Russell Westbrook, essentially straight up, maybe throw in Kendrick Nunn or something like that, but no assets of huge value, or I don't know, protected first. Getting Russ off the books for a long-term commitment to Rudy Gobert, who also, it should be noted, seems to be disliked by everybody he plays with.
Okay, that to me,
and every fan base that watches him,
is the thing you do kind of need to figure out.
Go.
Because, Andy, from a basketball standpoint, the answer to me is yes. I would absolutely make that trade, because while, how Darvin does his 4-in, 1-out thing with Gobert, I'm not totally sure how this works. Like, you might have to rethink that. At least from a defensive standpoint, you could put something together where Rudy Gobert patrols the paint, basically, and Anthony Davis is free to play off the weak side, free to close out on shooters, free to get out really
or LeBron
early.
Gets to do the roamer thing again.
Or, all those guys that can close out on shooters, get down really early on the break, do all of that stuff. And Gobert is one of those guys who he's so obviously problematic in certain ways in the playoffs that it's become kind of like Ben Simmons, where the conversation around him has turned from, is Rudy Gobert a little bit overpaid? Yeah, it might be. Is he limited in some ways that you got to work around? Sure. To like, that guy's trash. Like, people talk about Ben Simmons like he's the worst player in the NBA. I understand he's got issues, and like, there's off court stuff, there's attitude stuff, but the actual player is really good. Gobert is kind of like that. And so if you could give me that player, it creates an intriguing possibility for the Lakers defensively, to say the very least. Certainly takes a lot of the pressure away from Anthony Davis in this "you must play center" thing, because that's taken care of. It does give the Lakers another player that they can use as a foundational guy after LeBron goes and buys a team in Vegas, and
which we're going to discuss.
Right. If not today, then certainly for next week. I don't love it from a basketball standpoint, but I don't hate it enough that I think it's worth saying no to, because I don't think Gobert is untradeable. I think you can turn around and trade Rudy Gobert again for maybe something else. You can try to red paper clip your way or break him into 3 pieces or whatever it might be. So I would do it from a basketball standpoint, Andy, but the point you made earlier about does everyone hate Rudy Gobert is relevant to this conversation, and we should discuss it next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Sakara, bringing you plant-rich, nutrient-dense meals, snacks, and supplements that nourish without sacrificing taste or quality. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine, which is pretty amazing, and they're on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. I've had their breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, Brian. Breakfasts.
The word is breakfasts.
Breakfasts.
No, the word is breakfasts.
All right,
been meaning to mention that for the last month. Breakfasts.
Breakfi. They sent a peach parfait for one of my breakfi, and it felt decadent, but it was awesome, totally healthy. The protein power plate with green lentils, cauliflower, rainbow carrot, turmeric flatbread was also really good. No, the lentils is Brian comes in with the French lentils is soup, which was also excellent. All delivered directly to your door, ready to eat, from the best-selling Metabolism Super Powder to the Foundation, their daily supplement packs. Sakara's products are designed to support your wellness goals anytime, anywhere. And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com/lockedon20 or enter the code LOCKEDON20 at checkout. Again, Sakara, SAKARA.com/LOCKEDON20 to get 20% off your first order. Sakara.com/LOCKEDON20.
Okay, before we get into everybody hates Rudy, do you accept my sort of, with awareness of what the potential problems could be from a basketball standpoint, the idea of like, yeah, I think that makes the Lakers better. You got some figuring out to do, but Rudy Gobert is a really good player who would improve the Lakers next year if you make that trade.
He certainly makes them potentially better. He offers a lot of upside, especially defensively, where they were a wreck. Actually, you know who would love Rudy Gobert? Frank Vogel.
Yeah, that's true.
He would love
trading Russ for Rudy Gobert is just an act of trolling.
That is a double middle finger.
Somehow, like it's like triple trolling if they could somehow get Utah to throw Roy Hibbert in there. I don't know. I don't even know what Roy's up to these days. But
falling down.
Yeah.
He fell down a lot.
He did, more than Anthony Davis.
Yeah, he falls down a lot as a player.
I get the impression, though, that despite all that, despite the excellent sales pitch that I made, you would not make this trade.
It's hard to say without knowing exactly what Darvin Ham wants to do and like how. Rudy Gobert has to very specifically fit into how Ham wants to play, because he is not a flexible player in the way that you can utilize him. And what we've seen in Milwaukee, or if you want to go back to Atlanta when Darvin Ham was part of Budenholzer's staff, it's not a system or a style of play that would seemingly utilize naturally a guy like Gobert. So all joking aside, you want a real clear idea of exactly what Ham would want to do with him, and does this work? I would feel very bad because our friend Daman Rangula would not just give up the Lakers moving forward forever because he can't stand Gobert, but I think he would hate us. We and the Lakers would lose Daman forever, and that's a shame.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. I mean, the long-term money of it all, like we've talked about before, that's not my concern. I don't care about that. It needs to fit, though, pretty easily for what Ham wants to do, because there's already going to be a lot of work, even under the best circumstances. So I wouldn't reject it outright, but it's complicated. I would say that. Beyond the whole chemistry
the other thing I like about it is if you could install another real, genuine defensive anchor there, it does give you a lot more freedom on what you can do on the perimeter. And I realize Utah was sunk defensively in part this year because their perimeter defense was just that bad. But if you could avoid being god awful, it does afford you the opportunity to have some weaknesses, whether it's on the wing, because you have Anthony Davis there too. I would just be intrigued to see how this works, assuming Rudy is just like not that toxic. Like, what does he? I mean, other than I remember the microphone thing and
no, he is apparently he just grates on people. Like the thing between him and Donovan Mitchell was not just Rudy acting like an asshat, and then Donovan testing positive. That was the thing that pushed it over the edge. They've had issues for a while. I mean, Rudy Gobert complains a lot. He gets very passive aggressive. Him and LeBron together could be interesting. Speaking of LeBron,
he fits a passive aggressive, complains a lot. He make a perfect Laker.
LeBron looking to own a team moving forward.
So if you missed it, I guess on the upcoming episode of The Shop, correct? This is a topic of conversation, and it was part of the trailer, and then pushed out by all of LeBron's social media arms that LeBron wants to own a team,
an NBA
wants
team
it to be in Vegas. Yes, and that's a place where the NBA has long to be rumored to be expanding. The arena there where the Golden Knights play is spectacular. It's gorgeous to look at. It's a great building. It's right there off the Strip.
Is that where the Aces play too?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
It's down the street from the Allegiant where the Raiders play. So it's a beautiful building. The NBA is going to land there eventually. There are some players that I think would make lousy owners. LeBron ain't one of them. I think he'd be a spectacular owner. And you want to talk about a place that would be instantly become a free agent destination. LeBron James's NBA team in Las Vegas, I think, would qualify.
Well, he's already been moving in this direction pretty aggressively anyway. I believe for now about a decade, he's had an ownership stake with a soccer team in Liverpool, I believe, somewhere in England. But, he's been involved with that for a while. And you see LeBron on social. He's a big soccer guy. He
is Liverpool.
And I believe it was last year, became part of the ownership stake with the Boston Red Sox. Shockingly, Brian, he and I believe it's Rich Paul or Maverick Carter. I don't remember which one off the top of my head, part of Team LeBron, but they were the first Black owners of any kind with that franchise. I did not see that coming. That's so unusual for both that city and its
history of diversity.
Yes, and advancement and openness.
Particularly, Andy, in sports.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. In sports, the advancement and inclusion and openness towards Black athletes just goes on forever.
It's weird though, because Bill Russell was a groundbreaking coach, with the Celtics, obviously, and Casey Jones, and it's like they've had representation. But man alive, the city doesn't really make you seem like the fan base really just doesn't make you feel like you want to know that.
The Sox in particular, I highly recommend, by the way, Bomani Jones, the Right Time podcast. He just had Howard Bryant from ESPN and Meadowlark on to promote a book that he wrote about Ricky Henderson, which sounds spectacular. Howard's a terrific writer, but he was telling stories about Ricky Henderson, and Ricky Henderson was part of the Red Sox for a little while, and they got into some of that history, and it's really worth your time to listen to. The other thing, though, that jumped out to me is the idea of LeBron in Vegas with this team. Just reminds me, Brian, of how, especially at this late stage of LeBron's career, there is this push-pull, the push with maintaining his body, spending $1 million, $2 million each year on body maintenance, keeping himself in the highest conditioning possible, and the pull of, I love tequila, I love red wine. LeBron setting up shop in Las Vegas post-career makes me feel that there's going to be a lot of pull going on.
Well, I mean, it's once you give it up, I mean, he's going to lean into whatever else is left.
What better place, though, to lean into that than Vegas?
No
judgment.
I mentioned before, I see a natural fit here. I mean, you can keep your place in LA. It's a hop, skip, and a jump for your private jet to get from LA to Vegas. The whole
By then
thing
it'll
works.
be a private hovercraft.
It might be. I would anticipate LeBron getting an ownership stake in some NBA team very soon.
Yeah.
Very soon after he
Yes.
retires. This is not going to be something that takes a long time.
No, and
It's
I
just
agree
a matter
with
of finding
you.
matter of finding the right fit.
And I agree with you. I think he will be very, very good at it. I think this is something that, like, he's one of those guys that, generally speaking, I mean, other than maybe roster building while a member of its team, I don't think he does a whole hell of a lot without giving a serious amount of thought to all of the particulars that go into it. It's like we talked about with Amy Nicholson, the film critic for the New York Times, on last week's show with LeBron in Hollywood. I think he's shown really good taste with the projects that he's gotten involved with.
And I just think he's like Kobe in the sense that he tends to surround himself and take stock with very smart people.
Yep.
And he would certainly have no trouble attracting them. So we're working on some guests for next week. The finals wrapping up here over the next week or so, which will then really allow a lot of the fun, juicy rumors to begin. We're getting closer to the draft, which the Lakers could certainly work their way into. We're trying to get some guests around that as well. So we're starting to get to the fun stuff, Andy. We're the end of the wilderness is nigh, and we're getting to the really fun stuff: free agency, the draft, and all that. Locked On Lakers is on YouTube, is where you go to look at the podcast and see us. Reminder to everybody to check out the NBA mock draft, Ultimate NBA mock draft. That starts on June 16th. Over 50 insiders. Nothing equals the Ultimate NBA mock draft. Locked On NBA big board draft experts, including Odyssey insiders. So the first pick is June 16th, and you go and you search the Ultimate NBA mock draft and follow now so you don't miss any picks for that. And we will see everybody Monday.